Good morning, and welcome to the King's Report for Saturday, September 30th, 2017, 8th month of Chungi, 8th year of Chungi, 8th month, and the 11th day on the heavenly calendar. I'm Tim Elder, sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyungjin Moon. And let's start with the weather this morning, as we usually do. It's 49 degrees and foggy in the Cheongguk area. Shower is possible early morning. And we're only getting up to 60 degrees today. And it's going to be quite a bit cooler. Just a couple days ago, last Friday or Thursday was it, that we were in the 80s. And here we are in the 60s, low 60s, barely making it into the 60s. So please don't catch cold with this huge drop in temperature. Tomorrow's going to be warmer, getting up to 67 degrees and sunny. It'll be pleasant day tomorrow, but also nighttime temperatures are going to be quite cold. 39 degrees, not cold but cool. 39 degrees tonight and 39 degrees tomorrow. And then a few days after that, we'll be in the low 70s for high temperatures and in the low 40s during the night. So autumn is here. In fact, it is perhaps rather late in the autumn now, as far as the weather and temperature is concerned. Let's go to our Rima. In Rima, I'm led to Mark chapter 14. This is the scene of the Last Supper before Jesus is crucified. And I was led to verse 20. And he answered and said unto them, It is one of the 12 that dippeth with me in the dish. So this is where in verse 18, Jesus says, Verily I say unto you, one of you which eateth with me shall betray me. And in verse 19, they ask him, and they began to be sorrowful, and they say unto him one by one, Is it I? Is it I? That's interesting, isn't it? Why would they say, Is it I? Am I the one who's going to betray you? Am I the one who's going to betray you? It's interesting that they would answer in that way. And he answered and said unto them, It is one of the 12 that dippeth with me in the dish. And then 21 he says, The Son of Man indeed goeth as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. Good were it for that man if he had never been born. So basically, Jesus is calling out Judas in this verse. I think in the other Gospels, it is specifically Judas is specified here, that Judas got up and left. But this verse reminds us, though, that betrayal comes from those who are closest to Christ. Who was it? I can't remember now. It was telling me that when someone at the bottom of the organization goes away, that's not a betrayal. That's simply someone leaving, but a betrayal happens when someone close to the central person turns against him. Certainly that is a reminder to us who are blessed to be close to Father's inheritor and representative body, that we need to watch our step. We need to watch our step and not betray. In the Cheonseonggyeong, I'm led to the book 10, chapter 1, and the first entry in chapter 1. Let me read the English first. Why were we born? Why should we live? And where should we go? You should not think that you were the cause of your birth. And people are born into this world, yet do not know the origin and purpose of their birth. They are ignorant of the motivation and purpose of their existence. Neither our birth, nor our life, nor our death stems from our own intentions. Then what do we have to be proud about? We have no control over our birth. We are merely custodians in this life, and we cannot avoid the path of death. Thus, any attempt at self-praise and holding self-indulgent pride is pitiful. Once born, we are destined to live and destined to die and pass away to the next world. These words were spoken in 1959. I always harp on the translation, don't I? But I think it is my responsibility to point out some things. Here, the translator uses the word custodians. We are merely custodians in this life. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because I can't think of any other place where Father uses the word custodian, and I really couldn't think what did Father say that the translator chose to translate as custodian. And so I looked in the Korean, and guess what? It's not there. It's not there. The word that would correspond to custodian is not in the Korean. I'm trying to figure out where the translator might have come up with that word. And I'm not sure. In fact, I don't know. I'm sure he must have felt that. But anyway, this entry is rather, the Korean is rather poetic. And I think the translator had trouble sort of communicating that poetic aspect of Father's. Well, it's prose, but it's kind of poetic prose. And there's also another thing that I need to point out is that when Father uses the first person singular pronoun in Korean, and sort of the generic pronoun in Korean is na. Na is sort of the generic first person. Of course, depending on the level of politeness and so forth, there are other pronouns, but the generic first person singular pronoun in Korean is na. And here Father uses that first person singular generic pronoun. But to a Korean reader, it's obviously that he's not talking about himself. He's talking about people in general. And so the translator translate this into English into the first person plural pronoun we, which I suppose is okay. I suppose there's no other choice for Korean, but it's unfortunate though that Father's sort of so when Father says to do a more literal translation, for example, would be 내가 왜 왔으며 내가 왜 살아야 하며 어디로 가야 하느냐. Using the first person singular, although it's generic and all we understand it means everybody, it still gives a much more personal feeling to this. Whereas the we sort of dilutes that, doesn't it? That's a bit unfortunate. But I'm mostly disturbed though by the use of the word custodian, and also the inability to. Anyway, but it just underlines for me again that in order to connect artistically to Father, you just cannot rely on translations. Anyway, I'm sorry. I don't know. Maybe that's why. Yeah, but here Father is telling us not to take ourselves too seriously, isn't he? He's telling ourselves, we weren't born because we wanted to be born. And we don't die when and where we want to die, unless we commit suicide, and that's a sin, so he's assuming that we're not going to do that. We don't choose the time of our death or the manner of our death. And we also, during our lifetime, and this is the place where I think the translator got in trouble with trying to introduce the word custodian. During our lifetime, he says, 무엇을 갖고 자기 자신의 무엇을 갖고 살지도 못하고. So even in our lifetime, we're not really living by anything that we ourselves have, by our own merits or anything like that, because and the implication is that this is given to us by God. This is what we are doing is given to us by God. We are given certain talents. We are given opportunities. We are led by God to into certain situations to meet certain people. And of course, we have our 5% responsibility, but even that 5% portion of responsibility is given to us by God. And so, as he closes the paragraph, he says that we need to be humble. We should not take pride and say, "Oh, I did this. Oh, I did that." We should be humble about ourselves, both in a positive way and in a negative way. What I mean is that sometimes people focusing on themselves say, "Oh, I'm terrible. I'm such a terrible person." That's also a lack of humility, because you're also then centering on yourself. That's also a very arrogant thing, a very arrogant attitude to take. And I think it's important for us to just talk to God and focus on developing our relationship with God. Take ourselves seriously, but not too seriously. Life brings us all kinds of things, and good things, painful things, happy things, sorrowful things. But in every situation, I know that God is with us, and that God is guiding us through our life, and that we have Him to rely on, and we should rely on Him. It is His desire to see us complete our portion of responsibility and to become the people that He created us to be. But don't focus on ourselves. Don't focus on ourselves. I think that's the message that Father has. And I think that is also the message that perhaps Judas should have had. And perhaps there was that inability. I think it was that inability that led him to betray Christ and end up in a situation where it would have been better if he had never been born. All right, let's take a break, and we'll start going through the news from a Tony perspective when we come back after a minute or so.
Car Arms, Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Car Firearms Group, with a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Car Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood, the history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun, to the best in compact concealed carry. Car Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Car Firearms Group, made in the USA. Visit car.com today.
Welcome back to the King's Report for September 29th, 2017, September 30th actually, September 30th, 2017. It's a Saturday, and we're in the 8th month of Chungi, the 8th month and the 11th day. I want to start this morning with what happened during the NFL football game between Green Bay Packers and Chicago Bears on Thursday night. And guess what? Something good happened. This is Breitbart News' report on that. It says, looking exactly like a bunch of surly, sullen, spoiled babies they are during Thursday night's NFL game between Green Bay Packers and Chicago Bears, the players might have all chosen to be muscle-bound powders while locking arms, but those very same surly, sullen, spoiled babies were all standing for the Star-Spangled Banner. Same thing happened Monday. They locked arms. They pouted. But the Dallas Cowboys all stood for the national anthem. As far as Sunday goes, the Pittsburgh Steelers have already reassured their justifiably enraged fans that when the national anthem plays, the team will stand. If these overgrown toddlers all need to lock arms and hold on to one another like scared little Care Bears, no one cares. If locking arms is how they choose to show unity or fight for equality or raise awareness or whatever the dumb little SJW cause is this week, no one cares. The backlash against these crybabies, which is still growing, has only ever been about one thing: disrespecting the American flag. We know this because it is simply a fact that when you do not stand for the national anthem, you are, by definition, disrespecting the flag. We also know this because Colin Kaepernick, the anti-American cop hater who set the indefensible precedent of taking a knee during the national anthem, told us so. There was no ambiguity from the burnt-out former 49er on the issue. He told us flat out, I am not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses black people and people of color. NFL players suddenly choosing to disrespect the flag as opposed to spitting on it is a victory. As an NFL player suddenly choosing to respect the flag as opposed to spitting on it is a victory for President Trump, who spoke for tens of millions of Americans last week when he lashed out against these selfish whiners. It is perfectly appropriate for the American president to defend the American flag against breathtakingly ungrateful millionaires. Until Trump spoke up, all these bubbled infants heard was praise from bubbled infants in the sports and political media. Acclaim for how brave they are, plaudits for their wokeness. And all of this from the very same sports and political media that mercilessly ridiculed Tom Tebow for taking his own kind of knee. Once again, Trump did what he does like no other. Reminded us normal people that we are not alone in our beliefs and in our outrage. Once again, he punctured through the media's false reality. A false reality that justified the indefensible. And once again, we normal people stood up for ourselves and for our country. And maybe, just maybe, we have finally put a stop to this particular outrage. Regardless, the damage the NFL has done to itself will last for years. The entire debacle is the mother of all unforced corporate errors. And who will ever forget or forgive the fact that the only form of self-expression the NFL allows its players is to hate on America? I know I won't, ever. This was an opinion piece by John Nolte and the Breitbart News. So, looks like the NFL players finally found their footing. And they're not disrespecting the American flag, at least for now. We'll have to see what happens on future games. I want to go to the situation in Puerto Rico, where it's actually kind of bad. Let's go to San Juan mayor begging for help. The mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico, sharply rebuked the Trump administration's efforts to aid the island in the wake of Hurricane Maria and delivered an emotional plea to anyone who can hear us to save us all. I will do what I never thought I was going to do. I am begging anyone who can hear us to save us from dying. If anyone out there is listening to us, we are dying, and you are killing us with the inefficiency, Carmen Yulin Cruz said on Friday. Cruz's plea came as Puerto Ricans struggle to recover from the devastating impact of Maria after the storm slammed into the island 9 days ago, leaving its millions of residents without power. Aid has been slow to arrive to residents on the island who are in increasingly dire need of food, water, and medicine. The Trump administration has come under fierce scrutiny from Puerto Ricans and lawmakers for not helping the U.S. territory quickly enough. The U.S. Virgin Islands congressional delegate and the top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee on Friday called for an emergency oversight hearing on the disaster response. Urgent action by our committee now could help accelerate the federal response to the devastation in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands and make a measurable and significant difference in the lives of American families there. Representative Elijah Cummings, a Democrat of Maryland, and Delegate Stacey Plaskett, Democrat of Virgin Islands, wrote in a joint letter. The president insisted on Friday afternoon federal officials were doing a great job with relief efforts. We have done an incredible job considering there's absolutely nothing to work with, Trump told reporters at the White House. And a very big question is, what are we going to do about the power plant? Because the power plant is totally wiped out, he said. There's nothing, the power grid is gone. Cruz made headlines earlier on Friday after she issued a sharp condemnation of acting Homeland Security Secretary Elaine Duke's comments in which she called the federal government's response to the devastation a good news story. Maybe from where she's standing, it's a good news story, Cruz said. When you're drinking from a creek, it's not a good news story. When you don't have food for a baby, it's not a good news story. She added, damn it, this is not a good news story. This is a people are dying story. Well, I think there are lessons that we can learn from this situation. Don't rely on the government to come and help you. She says, for example, that people are drinking from a creek. Well, if you had the proper filters, you could drink from a creek if you have the proper survival filters. And we know this because the second king has told us this. And if the people of Puerto Rico had been watching the king's report and had prepared as the king had said to prepare, then they could be drinking from a creek, but they could be drinking clean water from a creek, filtered water from a creek. And they would have food for their babies because they would have prepared this food in advance. It's unfortunate that the message of the king did not get to the people of Puerto Rico before the hurricane, and the people of Puerto Rico were not able to prepare as the king has asked us to prepare. And so it behoves us, the rest of us, then to be prepared, since we have heard it. Since we have heard the king's words, then we certainly should not allow ourselves to be caught off guard by this kind of a thing. Be prepared to drink from a creek, all right? Be prepared to drink from a creek. He has already told us how to do that safely in a way that is not going to harm our health. So don't rely on the government. As the mayor of San Juan, she's a governor to operative as well, so all she knows how to do is to rely on her higher-ups. He says, the administration is not helping us. Of course, the administration should help them. I don't disagree with that. But the people should not be simply relying on that kind of help. Be prepared to especially in this time of judgment, this time of judgment, be prepared to fend for yourself. Meanwhile, not enough troops equipment in Puerto Rico, says the general in charge of relief. The Defense Department has not sent enough troops and vehicles to hurricane-ravaged Puerto Rico, but will soon send more, according to the three-star general newly in charge of coordinating the military response. Army Lieutenant General Jeff Buchanan said Friday morning that the Pentagon has 10,000 people helping with the response after Hurricane Irma and Maria ripped through the Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands earlier this month. We're certainly bringing in more troops, Buchanan said on CNN's New Day. For example, on the military side, we're bringing in both Air Force, Navy, and Army medical capabilities in addition to aircraft, more helicopters, but it's not enough, and we're bringing in more. The Pentagon has already allocated more than 4,000 troops to help in rescue and restoration efforts to the U.S. territories, but it wasn't until Thursday, 8 days after the Maria slammed into the Caribbean, that the U.S. Northern Command, NORTHCOM, sent Buchanan. The head of NORTHCOM's Joint Force Land Component Command is now serving as the Defense Department's primary liaison to the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Tom Bossert, the President Trump's Homeland Security Advisor, has defended the wait time in between the end of the storm and appointing Buchanan. It didn't require a three-star general 8 days ago, Bossert said of the government response. When asked whether it was a mistake to not have Buchanan on the ground in Puerto Rico earlier, Bossert replied, no, not at all. In fact, that doesn't affect, I think he says effect, but I think he meant affect. It doesn't affect the way that we stage equipment and the way we area command and field operation command. This is textbook, and it's been done well, Bossert told reporters Thursday at the daily White House press briefing. I can see why the mayor of San Juan and other people in Puerto Rico are frustrated. They say, we're dying, and in Washington say, hey, it's textbook. We're doing according to the textbook. But we're still dying. But listen, okay, the government is inefficient. Flash news. Yeah, the government is inefficient. This is why we want to privatize these kinds of government functions. Yeah? We want to privatize these kinds of government functions because private sector is always more efficient than the government. The Pentagon has been steadily increasing its help to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands after both were slammed by the two Category 5 storms. The hurricanes knocked out power across Puerto Rico, leaving nearly half of its population of more than 3.4 million without drinking water. Puerto Ricans and lawmakers, however, are frustrated with the federal government's response. Senator Marco Rubio, a Republican of Florida, said Friday on CNN that Trump should put the U.S. military in charge of handling and delivering aid to Puerto Rico. Isn't that interesting? They just want the military to take over. Just let the military take over. Put the whole place under martial law, I guess. He asserted that only the Pentagon could repair the logistical issues preventing aid from reaching island residents. San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz has said on Friday urged Trump to ramp up the federal assistance. Let me repeat that that previous quote about people are dying story. I expect that eventually Puerto Rico is going to come out of this ahead because their infrastructure is going to be replaced. They had a very, very poor infrastructure to begin with, and of course it is a territory that is bankrupt. They did declare bankruptcy, effective bankruptcy, earlier this year, so I think they'll probably come out ahead as a result of the aid that will eventually get to them. But I know it's going to be tough in the meantime. But that's the expected result of relying on the government. Help is going to be inefficient. It's going to be slow. Before the break, let's do one more story. Democratic Representative Soto, Hurricane Maria has already become a Katrina. They're saying the Democrats are trying to turn this into Trump's Katrina, and we'll see how far they're getting. On Friday's broadcast of MSNBC's The Beat, Representative Darren Soto, Democrat of Florida, stated that the aftermath of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico has already become a Katrina. Soto said, well, this has already become a Katrina. We have American citizens who pledge allegiance to our flag, serve in the military, pay taxes, and they don't know when the power is going to get back on. They don't know whether they're going to get water, whether they're going to get food, and so we need Trump administration to get up and act. He added that his Katrina statement meant this is an act of negligence, that they completely underestimated the scale of this and are only now starting to react after we stood on our desks for days screaming about the lives in jeopardy. Okay, well, we'll see. So okay, the government recovery effort in Puerto Rico is not going as fast as people there would like for it to. They're saying, hey, we were told that the government would help us in any kind of situation, and that's not happening. What's happening? What's going on here? So let's be prepared, all right? Let's be prepared ourselves. Okay, let's take a break now, and we'll come back in a minute with more news from a Chunuk perspective.
Car Arms, Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Car Firearms Group. With a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Car Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood. The history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun. To the best in compact concealed carry. Car Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Car Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit car.com today.
And welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, September 30th, 2017. I'm Tim Elder, sitting in for the second King of Chenuguk, Hyungjin Moon. And this segment, I want to go into the situation with the Republican Senate race, primary race in Alabama, and what that means in terms of the Trump revolution nationwide. It seems to be a very kind of a milestone, or shall we say a very, it teaches us a number of things. So last Tuesday, there was a primary, the Republican primary was held in Alabama, and Luther Strange, who had been appointed, he had been appointed to the Senate, to the U.S. Senate by the Alabama governor after the former Senator Jeff Sessions became Attorney General. And President Trump supported Luther Strange, and Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, the majority leader, supported Luther Strange through his Political Action Committee, and the whole Republican establishment supported Luther Strange. And he lost to Roy Moore, who was supported by the grassroots Republicans and by Breitbart News, by Steve Bannon, who was of course, President Trump's strategist until recently when he was kicked out of the White House. And so now the interesting thing is that many people are saying that, okay, now it looks like Steve Bannon is now going to carry on the Trump revolution without Trump. Steve Bannon is basically saying, okay, Trump has been sort of co-opted by, or is in danger of being co-opted by globalist and Republican establishment types, and so I'm going to continue the mandate, I'm going to carry on the mandate that the American voters gave President Trump back in November. Let's see what's going on. First of all, we need to know that even though Roy Moore won that Republican primary, his victory in the election, the special election in December, is not a sure thing. This election is going to be held in September, and the Democrats have put up their own candidate. And of course, Alabama is a very strongly Republican state. But even then, Roy Moore, because many people in the Republican Party don't like him, it's possible that he will lose to the Democratic candidate. And right now, He's ahead of the Democratic candidate just by less than 6 points, 6 percentage points. Alabama Republican Roy Moore leads Democratic Doug Jones by less than 6 points in a new Senate special election poll that's likely to raise questions about whether the deep red state is in play. Moore, the controversial former judge who won Tuesday's GOP primary runoff, leads Moore by a margin of 50.2% to 44.5% in a new poll conducted by Opinion Savvy and commissioned by Decision Desk HQ. About 5% of the poll voters said they were undecided. Democrats are cautiously eyeing the race in the hopes that Moore's penchant for controversy can help them pull off a surprise upset. So Democrats are hoping that the split in the Republican Party, as they see it, will give them a chance to actually increase their seats in the Senate and perhaps even in the House nationwide. So that's their hope. Moore has a solid base of support among the state's evangelical community, a reliable voting bloc, thanks to losing his position as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the state twice for disregarding court orders on the separation of church and state and gay marriage. In other words, he wanted to keep a monument of the Ten Commandments in the courthouse, and a court order told him to remove it, and he refused it. And so eventually he lost his position as a Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. And so because of that, he has a very solid support within the evangelical community in Alabama. But he's also drawn serious criticism for both those decisions, as well as some controversial comments he's made in the past. He's argued that terror attacks and violence may have been caused by a drift away from religion, that homosexual conduct should be illegal, and said that a Muslim congressman shouldn't be seated in Congress. And so that's why many Republicans don't like him. But the Trump supporters do like him. The Trump supporters who now, I guess, or at least they were the Trump 2016 Trump supporters, not necessarily the supporters of Trump now. But, Democratic groups are eyeing the dynamics of the race over the next few weeks to see how to engage. But while the polling could mean the race is within reach, it could also be encouraging to Republicans too. Moore has the support of the majority of supporters in the poll that just days after a brutal primary where the Republican establishment spent millions to bludgeon him. So it's possible that as Republican groups fall in line behind the nominee, Moore can consolidate even more support. Opinion Savvy polled 590 likely voters on Wednesday and Thursday. The poll has a margin of error of 4 percentage points. So that's what happened in Alabama. The grassroots GOP supporters defeated the establishment candidate, who had also been supported by President Trump. So what happens when Moore enters the Senate? If this is another story this is now on a roll call. If Roy Moore becomes Alabama's next senator, he can bring his gun to the Capitol, but it can't be loaded and must be securely wrapped. This is referring to the fact that one of the things that the Republican establishment was accusing him of is he's not really in favor of the Second Amendment. So at one campaign rally late in the election, he took out a gun and was waving it around to show that he was, in fact, in favor of the Second Amendment. But now this reporter is saying that, well, he probably won't be able to do that in the Senate chamber. He says he can bring his gun to the Capitol, but it can't be loaded, and it must be securely wrapped. So in other words, basically all he can do is use it as a paperweight, I guess. The gun-toting, Bible-quoting conservative firebrand will likely shake up the Senate whether he can wave his firearm around or not. Moore, the former Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, made headlines this week when he took out his gun at a campaign rally the night before the Republican primary runoff in a race to succeed former Senator Jeff Sessions, who is now Attorney General. It was not the first time Moore brought out a gun at a campaign event, but on Monday he did so to defy accusations levied by allies of GOP leaders who did not support his candidacy that he does not support the Second Amendment. Overcoming the millions of dollars spent on attack ads against him, Moore sailed to victory Tuesday night. In fact, he won by 9 percentage points. It was a big victory, not just a slim victory. He defeated Senator Luther Strange, who had been appointed to the seat. Moore is favored to win the December 12th general election in the Republican state, despite some of his controversial past comments. He will face Democrat Doug Jones, a former U.S. attorney. Moore is well known in the Yellowhammer state. He gained national attention in the mid-2000s when he fought unsuccessfully to keep a Ten Commandments monument at the state's Supreme Court. Inside elections with Nathan L. Gonzalez rates the race likely Republican. How exactly Moore would fit into the GOP conference remains to be seen, but some lawmakers said the outspoken former judge might have a tough time finding his stride as one of 100 senators. I think it's going to be a difficult transition. Alabama GOP Representative Gary Palmer said, as a judge, he had a gavel, and over there, he's not going to have a gavel. And Moore is likely to be a thorn in the side of leadership, particularly Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. The Senate Leadership Fund, a super PAC aligned with the Kentucky Republican, spent $5 million in the runoff to defeat Moore, which enraged the former judge. I don't know Mitch McConnell at all, Moore said in an interview in August after the super PAC launched its first ad against him. Why he's so passionate about me not coming to Washington, I don't know. Perhaps he realizes I won't be controlled. Though it's not clear what tack Moore would take once in the Senate, he owes McConnell and President Trump nothing. He would give Mr. McConnell, who operates with a razor-thin Republican majority, even less wiggle room than he currently has on tough negotiations, from tax overhaul to government spending deals to any future efforts on health care. It's already challenging to get stuff done, said GOP lobbyist Catherine Lehman, a former congressional leadership aide who is now with the law firm Holland & Knight. I can't imagine this makes it any easier, she said. Moore campaigned hard against his party's congressional leadership, especially McConnell. He told a cheering crowd the night before the runoff, Mitch McConnell needs to be replaced. Moore has also railed against the D.C. groups that backed Strange in the race, such as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. While Trump endorsed Strange, Moore has been careful to note that he still supports the president. I think Moore could be a problem for the current leadership, said Republican lobbyist Sam Guldig of the CGCN group. Guldig noted, however, that other Senate candidates who have run as outsiders, such as Republican Senator David Perdue of Georgia, have settled into the party's majority. So there's a path back if he chooses to take it, he said. But Moore has indicated that he could choose a different path. He has already shown early signs of aligning with conservative senators who have defied party leadership. Moore spoke with GOP Senators Mike Lee of Utah, Ted Cruz of Texas, and Rand Paul of Kentucky on Tuesday night after he won the runoff. All three have been known to buck leadership and hold up Senate business. In his victory speech, Moore said, "There were three senators who are important in our government." Moore could also find allies on the other side of the Capitol Dome. House Freedom Caucus Chairman Mark Meadows endorsed Moore in the runoff, and Meadows' Deputy Chief of Staff, Wayne King, tweeted from behind the scenes at Moore's victory rally Tuesday night. Roy Moore's not conventional. He's Roy Moore. He's unique, said Alabama senior GOP Senator Richard C. Shelby. Shelby said Moore would likely join 4 or 5 senators that we already have here that are challenging everything. For an example of what McConnell might have to deal with in Moore, look at the majority leader's relationship with Paul, his fellow Kentucky Republican. McConnell opposed Paul, who has deep ties to the Tea Party movement in the state 2010 GOP primary race. The two have grown cordial, but Paul opposed the recent GOP health care effort. And Moore reportedly would have also opposed the health care plan if he was in the Senate. He has decried what he views as government spending run amok, which could indicate a potential unwillingness to support government funding bills and raising the debt limit. Insiders still expect Moore to be a reliable GOP vote in most cases. As a conservative, we expect Roy Moore to vote largely in line with the Republican agenda and certainly President Trump's agenda, said Brian Walsh, a former aide to the Senate's number 2 Republican leader, John Cornyn of Texas. As for Moore's attacks on the party's congressional leaders, no one in the leadership end takes that personally, said Walsh, who is with the public affairs firm Rock Solutions. So we'll see if, assuming that Moore wins in December, we'll see what happens when he enters the Senate. Now, the interesting thing is that now this sort of the effect of this defeat of the establishment Republican candidate by the grassroots Republican candidate may spread, and especially as we go towards the elections next year, the midterm elections next year. CNN is reporting this, and this is it's on CNN, but it's CNN article is being linked to and reported on by Breitbart News. And of course, Breitbart News is basically now the sort of the official mouthpiece now of the Trump revolution. There's the, without Trump, sort of the Bannon wing or Bannon revolution, I guess you call it now. I don't know. So Breitbart News is reporting this, a CNN article. So I guess it's kind of an endorsement of it. And I'm reading it now from Breitbart News. A former White House strategist, Steve Bannon, is building on the momentum from Roy Moore's victory in the Alabama Senate runoff to recruit other populist economic nationalist candidates to challenge Republican establishment incumbents in 2018, CNN's Dana Bash reports. Bannon is also making clear there will be retribution for Republican consultants who betrayed the party's grassroots and misled the president about the state of Alabama race. At the top of that list is Luther Strange campaign operative Jeff Rowe. So this coming from the media outlet that is basically the Pravda, the Pravda of the Trump revolution. Don't criticize me too much for saying that, but that's what it is. I mean, this is the Breitbart News now is obviously the official media organ of the Trump revolution. So we're not going to expect objective reporting from Breitbart News. We're going on domestic political matters. We're going to expect them to tell us exactly how the Trump revolution is being led and what's being done in the Trump revolution. So, and that's of course that's informative, and that's important for us to know that. So they are now quoting directly from CNN as follows: the populist movement is going to do a house cleaning of all those individuals that made a living off the conservative grassroots while stabbing them in the back. A source familiar with Bannon's thinking tells CNN. A source familiar with Bannon's thinking. It's probably Bannon himself. Bannon is beginning that effort by trying to blackball GOP campaign strategist Jeff Rowe, who worked for Senator Luther Strange, who lost Tuesday's primary to Roy Moore. Bannon is spreading the word that he believes Rowe is responsible for dirty tactics against Moore, and alleging that Rowe worked with President Donald Trump's son-in-law and White House advisor Jared Kushner to mislead Trump about the state of the race in Alabama in and around Trump's endorsement of Strange. As for Rowe, Bannon is even telling potential GOP candidates that he won't meet with them if they hire Rowe, a veteran strategist who managed Ted Cruz's presidential campaign in 2016. Following his speech at Moore's victory rally Tuesday night, where Bannon credited the people with the victory, he vowed to help the populist wing of GOP win other Senate battles in 2018. To that end, he flew from Alabama to Colorado to begin recruiting Western candidates to run against Republican incumbents. Bannon also plans to head back down south to have meetings with those who may want to run in Tennessee for the seat Senator Bob Corker announced he will vacate, and in Mississippi to challenge sitting Republican Senator Roger Wicker. And then it gives the link to the original CNN story. So basically, Breitbart News is endorsing this CNN story about how Steve Bannon is on the warpath against the Republican establishment. and he's going to support other populist economic nationalist candidates who want to challenge the Republican establishment in 2018. Now the New York Times is also reporting, and this also is an article that Breitbart News is endorsing by linking to it. And so I want to go through this story as well, because Breitbart News is saying, hey, basically what this story says is pretty much true. So let's see what the New York Times is reporting this morning. Stephen K. Bannon and two of his longtime benefactors are putting together a political coalition designed to ensure that the victory of a Republican insurgent in the Alabama state primary this week was just the beginning of the surprises that await the party establishment. So this is, Bannon sees this as, and he may be successful, he sees this as being sort of a new movement. Not the Tea Party. The Tea Party was just a very weak thing compared to what Bannon has planned. He's planning a real revolution. He's serious about this. Mr. Bannon brings to the effort the political and promotional skills he showed as President Trump's chief strategist and advocate for populist stances on issues like immigration and trade. His benefactors, the billionaire hedge fund investor Robert Mercer and his daughter Rebecca Mercer, bring wealth and their own proven anti-establishment streak. So this is the split in the elite that Kuchjinim and the king have been talking about. Here, Bannon has the financial backing of this billionaire investor and daughter, who have wealth and their own proven anti-establishment streak. The obstacles Mr. Bannon and the Mercers face are formidable. The well-funded resistance of mainstream Republicans, a shortage of viable anti-establishment candidates like Roy Moore, the victory in Tuesday's Alabama Republican Senate primary, the victor, an absence of political infrastructure for supporting them, and their own reputations for not always following through on big political plans. But the Bannon-Mercer alliance is likely to be a potent factor in widening the divisions laid bare by the Alabama race and the intra-party battles that have crippled the Republican agenda in Congress. It could put Mr. Bannon and the Mercers on a collision course with not just the Republican establishment, but with other donor-driven political organizations, including the one built by the billionaire brothers Charles G. and David H. Koch, and potentially with Mr. Trump. So the Mercers are going up against the Koch brothers and potentially Trump. At Mr. Moore's victory party, Mr. Bannon promised that, quote, "You're going to see in state after state, people that follow the model of Judge Moore, that do not need to raise money from the elites, from the crony capitalists, from the fat cats in Washington, D.C., New York City, Silicon Valley," unquote. But Mr. Bannon acknowledges that the disruption he and the Mercers hope to foment will not be easy. "We've got a long haul in front of us," Mr. Bannon said in an interview at the Capitol Hill townhouse that doubles as his part-time residence and as the Washington headquarters of Breitbart News, the website owned in part by the Mercers and run by Mr. Bannon. In particular, he singled out what he called the lack of a deep bench of polished candidates who could carry the America First banner into battle in Republican primaries against establishment favorites as effectively as Mr. Moore, who did not need any outside help to defeat Luther Strange. But look at how the conservative movement and the Republican establishment groomed the guys that the populist nationalist Trump went through like a sieve through grass, Mr. Bannon said. How long had they been groomed? He and Mr. Mercer began hashing out a rough outline for a shadow party that would advance Mr. Trump's America First agenda, even if Mr. Trump himself strayed away from it, during a 5-hour meeting last month at the family's Long Island estate a couple of days before Mr. Bannon's resignation from the White House. So Bannon and the Mercers are talking about creating a shadow party, Early plans call for the creation of a sort of think tank to articulate the animating issues of the coalition, according to donors and operatives who have talked to Mr. Bannon, the Mercers, or their allies. They say the coalition will ally with existing groups on specific issues and will support vetted candidates and causes. Mr. Bannon has already forged an alliance with a super PAC and a nonprofit group, the Great America PAC and the Great America Alliance, which were among the biggest spenders on behalf of Mr. Moore in Alabama. The goal is for approved groups and candidates to be funded by not only the Mercers but by other donors recruited by the family and Mr. Bannon, a funding model similar to the one used by the Kochs and other major donor operations. After the Alabama primary, Mr. Bannon flew to Colorado Springs to recruit donors and candidates at a conference of conservatives. But the Bannon-Mercer coalition is much less organized at this stage compared with the other major donor operations, particularly the Koch's network, which resembles a privatized political party with offices in most states and which has spent more than $1.5 billion over the past dozen years trying to reshape American politics around the brothers' free enterprise ideals. Isn't that interesting? Did you realize that the Koch brothers network resembles a privatized political party? I mean, they're trying to reshape American politics around the brothers' free enterprise ideals. That's good, but it's interesting that we have these privatized political parties being run by billionaires in America. How many of us knew that? Mr. Bannon and the Mercers also stand out as more pugilistic in their tactics and ideology, bonding less over a shared cohesive political ideology than over a desire to disrupt the political establishment, the Republican establishment in particular. That has led them in the past to support candidates as varied as Mr. Moore, a hardline Christian conservative who has said homosexual conduct should be illegal, and Mr. Trump, who rarely attends church and has been married 3 times. To the extent that there is any ideological overlap among candidates the new coalitions will support, it will probably be that they favor limiting immigration, making trade policies more advantageous to American manufacturers, and disentangling the United States from sweeping international agreements and destroying the establishment. The establishment does not seem concerned, at least not yet. We'll see. Stephen Law, the president of the Senate Leadership Fund, which backs establishment Republicans and spent more than $10 million in the Alabama race in support of Mr. Strange, whose campaign and allies drastically outspent Mr. Moore's supporters. While Mr. Bannon has made a lot of noise about attracting capital from the Mercers, Mr. Law said, as we've seen ourselves, money alone is not the dispositive factor. The alliance between Mr. Bannon and the Mercers began 6 years ago when they were introduced by Andrew Breitbart, the founder of Breitbart News, who died in 2012. The timing was fortuitous. Mr. Mercer had recently been elevated to become a chief executive of Renaissance Technologies, one of the biggest grossing hedge funds in the world, the highest grossing hedge funds in the world. And under the stewardship of Ms. Mercer, the Mercer family was beginning to expand its political involvement. The family invested in a variety of groups across the conservative spectrum, hinting at a less defined political ideology than the Koch's libertarian-infused conservatism. Nevertheless, Mr. Bannon arranged for an invitation to the Koch Network's January 2012 gathering, where Ms. Mercer pledged $10.2 million to the network's efforts, $200,000 from her and $10 million from her father, and was effusively thanked by Charles Koch, according to attendees. But Ms. Mercer soon began expressing dissatisfaction with the network's strategy and leadership, and the family began striking out on its own politically. In 2013, the Mercer started a small government advocacy group with Mr. Bannon called Reclaim New York, that in some ways mimicked the Koch's lead group, Americans for Prosperity. And the Mercers steered candidates and groups they funded to a data firm in which they are major investors, Cambridge Analytica, which competes with the Koch-backed data firm i360. The Mercers have largely withdrawn from the Koch network by the beginning of the 2016 presidential campaign, donating $13.5 million to a super PAC supporting Senator Ted Cruz of Texas in his primary race battle against Mr. Trump, while the Koches sat out the presidential campaign. When Mr. Cruz dropped out, the Mercers quickly threw their support and $2 million in super PAC money to Mr. Trump. After Mr. Trump's victory, Ms. Mercer joined his transition team and the pro-Trump nonprofit group America First Policies, but she clashed with the group's operatives and left it to create her own nonprofit group called Making America Great. But after starting a $1 million television advertising campaign urging support for Mr. Trump, after the failure of his initial healthcare overhaul push, the group has shown few signs of activity. A representative for the Mercers declined to comment. Among the donors who have been briefed on or expressed interest in the coalition being assembled by Mr. Bannon and the Mercers are several who have given to the Koch's effort over the years, including the high-frequency trading pioneer W.E. Ed Bosarge of Houston, as well as the Oklahoma oilman Harold Hamm and the Dallas businessman Thomas O. Hicks, Jr. Mr. Bosarge said that Mr. Bannon has the capacity, the knowledge to lead his own donor network, and he certainly has a wide following of people. Also expected to play a role in the new coalition, according to people involved in it, is the Silicon Valley entrepreneur Peter Thiel, a significant donor to Mr. Trump's campaign and an informal White House advisor who is close to both the Mercers and Mr. Bannon. In the meantime, the new coalition will not be afraid to call out Mr. Trump when he wavers on campaign promises like building a wall along the southern border with Mexico, said people familiar with the plans. We want to be supportive of him, and we believe the agenda he ran on was correct, said Chris Buskirk, the publisher of the online journal American Greatness, who has been recruited to help articulate and defend the policy positions espoused by the coalition. We also want to lay the foundation for political change that both outlives this administration and expands upon it. Eric Beach, who started Great America PAC and Great America Alliance, said that enforcing Mr. Trump's vision was only part of the goal. Our efforts are about replacing the GOP establishment, he said. The group spent about $175,000 backing Mr. Moore by airing ads, placing robocalls, and staging a rally last Thursday featuring speeches by the former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin and the former Trump White House advisor Sebastian Gorka. Already, Mr. Bannon, the Mercers, or their deputies have had talks with at least 7 Republicans who are eyeing Senate campaigns, and the Mercers who have donated $500,000 to super PACs that could support 3 of the candidates. Mr. Mercer also donated $50,000 to a super PAC called Remember Mississippi that is affiliated with an aide to Chris McDaniel, a Mississippi state lawmaker who is considering challenging Senator Roger Wicker in a primary next year. Mr. McDaniel, who was accused of racism during an unsuccessful 2014 primary campaign, met with Mr. Bannon after a rally for Mr. Moore in Fairhope, Alabama, where he was asked if he was invited to Mr. Moore's campaign or by Mr. Bannon. Aren't they one and the same? Mr. McDaniel responded, according to a reporter on the scene. So, Bannon is trying to upset the Republican establishment. New York Times says the establishment is not worried, but we'll see as things progress. After we come back from a break, I'll talk about a person that Bannon is supporting for the Pennsylvania governor's office in the next year's governor's race. All right, let's take a break now, and we'll come back in a few minutes.
back at me? Will we leave behind the innocent to grieve on their own, on the run, when their lives have only begun? These could be our daughters and our sons. And just like a drum, I can hear their hearts beating. I know my God won't let them be defeated. Every child has a dream to belong and be loved. Boys become kings, girls will be queens, wrapped in your majesty. When we love the least of these, then they will be brave and free. Shout your name in victory. When we love the least of these, when we love the least of these. Break our hearts once again. Help us to remember when we were only children hoping for a friend. Won't you look around? These are the lives that the world has forgotten, waiting for doors of our hearts and our homes to open. Boys become kings, girls will be queens, wrapped in your majesty. When we love the least of these, then they will be brave and free. Shout your name in victory. When we love the least of these, when we love the least of these. If not us, who will be like Jesus to the least of these? If not us, tell me who will be like Jesus to the least of these. Boys become kings, girls will be queens, wrapped in your majesty. When we love. Little hands, shoeless feet, lonely eyes looking back at me. Will we leave behind the innocent to grieve on their own, on the run, when their lives have only begun? These could be our daughters and our sons. And just like a drum, I can hear their hearts beating. I know my God won't let them be defeated. Every child has a dream to belong and be loved.
At break of day, in hope we rise, we speak your name.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, September 30th, 2017, 8th year of Chungi, 8th month, and the 11th day by the Holy Heavenly Calendar. So we've been talking about Bannon carrying on the Trump revolution without Trump. And he's going around the country. He won in Alabama, and he's going around the country looking for other places where he can support anti-establishment Republican candidates who will upset the establishment. And he's already chosen a candidate for the Pennsylvania governor's race, which is coming up next year. Right now, Pennsylvania has a Democratic governor, and the Republicans want to make that a Republican governor next year, and Bannon has his man. In an article, this is again in Breitbart News, in an article appearing in the Morning Call on Friday. So this is interesting style that Breitbart News has now, where they don't break stories themselves. Instead, they wait for other media outlets to break stories that they already know are happening. They already know to be true, and they already have, but then instead of breaking them themselves, they're waiting for others to break them, and then they link to them. Not sure why they're doing that. So this is, again, Breitbart News talking about an article in a publication called Morning Call. In an article appearing in the Morning Call on Friday, Mark Levy writes that although President Donald Trump has yet to endorse a candidate for governor in Pennsylvania's 2018 election, his former chief strategist and Breitbart executive chairman, Stephen K. Bannon, gave his stamp of approval to Republican State Senator Scott Wagner while speaking to conservatives at a gathering in St. Louis. Levy writes, out of Harrisburg, President Donald Trump hasn't endorsed a candidate in Pennsylvania's gubernatorial election next year, but Scott Wagner might have something close to it. Stephen Bannon's stamp of approval. Bannon, the divisive ex-Trump strategist, urged a conservative gathering at a St. Louis hotel on Sunday to support the Republican state senator from York County. Conservatives could start taking the country back in Tuesday's U.S. Senate GOP primary in Alabama, where Bannon and Trump campaigned for different candidates, and when Scott Wagner runs in Pennsylvania, Bannon told the gathering. Wagner, a Trump supporter who runs the municipal waste hauling company he founded, spoke right before Bannon at the gathering and criticized not only Democratic Governor Tom Wolf, but also his fellow Republican lawmakers. Wagner told the crowd that his 2-hour trip flying to St. Louis with Bannon left him 500% more emboldened. You can read the rest of the story here, and it links to the story in Morning Call. And so Breitbart is linking to this story that was written on Friday, but actually that was not the first time that it was broken. Pennsylvania news outlets have been reporting on this for a few days now. Here's a story in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette from September 26th, 4 days ago. Headline is a PA gubernatorial candidate Scott Wagner emboldened after plane pooling with Steve Bannon. And here we go. PostPennLive.com on September 25. Chilling with Steve Bannon, PA Scott Wagner vows to take out the trash. And on 26th again, the Delaware County Daily Times. Steve Bannon weighs in on Pennsylvania governor's race by endorsing GOP's Scott Wagner. So this story's been around now for a few days, that Steve Bannon has endorsed Scott Wagner for the Republican nomination in next year's Pennsylvania governor's race. We'll have to find out more about Scott Wagner and see what President Trump does. Will President Trump go along with that, or will he do what he did in Alabama and endorse an establishment candidate that is opposed by Bannon and company? We'll have to see what happens there. But here is one article in a Pennsylvania news outlet, a News and Opinion. This is the PhillyMag.com News and Opinion section. Steve Bannon endorses Pennsylvania's Trump-loving gubernatorial candidate. A 2-hour plane ride with Steve Bannon left State Senator Scott Wagner feeling emboldened last weekend and apparently earned the gubernatorial hopeful an endorsement. Wagner, the York Republican who said that warm bodies cause climate change, chatted with Bannon on the way to St. Louis for a gathering of the Phyllis Schlafly Eagles, a pro-family interest group that opposes feminist goals, political correctness and gay marriage, among other things. According to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Wagner said at the meeting that he was pretty emboldened before his plane ride with Bannon, but that right now I'm like 500% more emboldened. Bannon endorsed Wagner shortly thereafter. You're going to have to go and take the country back, Bannon said, according to the Post-Gazette, and we're going to start taking it back in November when Scott Wagner runs in Pennsylvania. Bannon and Wagner reportedly criticized both Democrats and Republicans at the gathering, with Bannon relaying Wagner's claim that Republicans are giving Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf a free pass. And you know what? Enough is enough. Pennsylvania Democrats jumped on the endorsement, claiming Bannon has been plotting a coordinated attack on Republican establishment candidates, and Scott Wagner's anti-Semitic, white nationalist, and pro-Trump views, as well as his extremist positions on health care and women's rights, are fully in line with Bannon's agenda. Wolf used it as a fundraising opportunity, saying to beat Bannon. Wagner's campaign manager, Jason High, responded to the criticism with the following statement via Politics PA. I think PA Dems should spend less time worrying about who is supporting Scott and more time worrying about what a failed governor Tom Wolf is. Pennsylvania state government is falling apart all around Governor Wolf, and all he and his cronies in the Democratic Party want to talk about are national issues. So that is the governor's race in Pennsylvania that is shaping up for next year, and let's all pray that God's will be done there.
A day after the GOP presented.
Meanwhile, the tax plan that President Trump presented to Congress a few days ago is already in trouble. Not from the Democrats, but from his own party. This is a story linked to on Drudge. The tax plan, Trump's tax plan, is already in trouble with his own party as plans to axe state and local tax deductions come under fire from Republicans. The White House tax plan proposes to raise $1 trillion over 10 years by eliminating the deduction for the state and local income taxes people pay. And what this does is that it, when people who itemize their deductions, right? Not all of us itemize our deductions. Some of us just take the standard deduction. But when people itemize their deductions, and this is usually people who, for example, people who own a house and have a mortgage will often itemize their deductions because they're paying a lot of money in terms of interest on that mortgage, and the interest is deductible. But other people also itemize. But one thing that they can also itemize is their whatever state and local taxes that they pay. They can deduct those from their taxable income on the federal form. So if that is eliminated, then what effect will that have? Well, it means that some states are charging quite high interest, income tax. They have see, was it here that we saw that map? Yes, here. And I don't know if the tech team can get this map up on the screen. It's in the Rio. Are you able to find this? This is if you go to on Drudge Report, the upper left hand sort of a list of links there. Go into the one that says tax plan hits first snag with Republicans, and it's a Daily Mail.co.uk article. And if you go down midway, there's a map of the United States which shows what different states charge their residents in terms of income tax, state income tax. So this is income tax that people pay to the state. In the United States, we pay income tax to the federal government, but also to the individual states. and states charge at different rates. And so, and some states charge quite a bit. California, 13.3%, for example. Here another one, Oregon, 9%. Minnesota, 9.85%. New York, 8.82%. Maine, wow, Maine, 10%. Looks like, yeah. So in Vermont, 8.95%. So if these people are no longer able to deduct this, then those people will be paying more money, more in terms of taxes to the federal government. So it would make sense for people to start moving to states that have a lower income tax. Pennsylvania, for example, is one of the lowest ones, 3 point something percent, 02%, I think it says. And of course, a few states have no income tax at all. Washington, Alaska, Nevada, Texas, Florida. These states, and also South Dakota, Wyoming, these states have no income tax at all. So there would be a stronger incentive for people to move out of the high income tax states and towards the low income tax states. So some of the people in Congress who were elected from the high income tax states, I guess understandably, are opposed to this. So that's the problem that Trump's tax plan is facing right now. Donald Trump wants to raise $10 trillion over the next 10 years, or I'm sorry, $1 trillion over the next 10 years by eliminating this deduction on the federal income tax form. As President Trump prepares to sell his tax plan to the nation's manufacturing lobby on Friday, his best-laid tax plans have already drawn objections from some fellow Republicans who are fuming over the decision to end deductions for state and local income taxes. This situation will pit the White House against members of Congress from states that pile high income taxes on top of what the federal government takes from paychecks. High-income Californians, for instance, pay as much as 13.3% of their income to the state, in addition to their federal taxes. New Yorkers can pay up to 8.82%. Just 7 U.S. states have no personal income taxes, including Texas, Florida, and Nevada. Under the Trump tax reform plan, a family earning $100,000 in Los Angeles pays about $6,000 in state and local income taxes. Losing the ability to deduct that expense would cost the hypothetical taxpayers around $1,800. That's another $1,800 that would go from that taxpayer to the federal government. The GOP is working on a way to pacify legislators whose constituents would wind up paying more. The members with concerns from high-tax states have to be accommodated, Illinois Republican Representative Peter Roskam told the Wall Street Journal. Roskam is a senior member of the powerful House Ways and Means Committee. So you can imagine a soft landing on this that creative people are putting much time and energy into. The White House has shown no sign that it's willing to budge on eliminating the deduction for state and local taxes, since it would bring in about $1 trillion over a 10-year period. With the prospect of persuading Democrats to go along with the new tax play already slim, the GOP will need every Republican vote it can get. The Journal reports that the 9 states whose citizens use the deduction, measured as a percentage of income, are represented by 33 House Republicans. If Republicans lose more than 22 votes, Trump's tax plan is effectively dead. Ways and Means Chair Kevin Brady of Texas says he's listening to the affected lawmakers and hinted that tax law drafters might be flexible. It's crucial that we deliver tax relief for every American regardless of where they live, including in those states that have high state and local taxes, he said. We will have a choice between keeping that deduction for a few or lowering tax rates for every American. Trump is set to address the National Association of Manufacturers on Friday in Washington. A senior administration official says Trump will promote the tax plan as one that will help American businesses be more competitive. The president and congressional Republicans this week released the outlines of a nearly $6 trillion tax cut plan that would deeply reduce taxes for corporations, simplify tax brackets, and nearly double the standard deduction used by most tax filers. So yeah, most of us would not be affected by this change because most of us use the standard deduction. And if you have worked on your own taxes, you know what I'm talking about. Young people, for example, would very, very rarely itemize deductions, and so they would not be affected by this change. In the remarks, Trump is expected to highlight a provision that would allow businesses for the next 5 years to write off the full cost of new equipment in the year it's purchased, instead of spreading out the benefit over several years. Under the broader proposal, corporations would see their top tax rate cut from 35% to 20%. 7 personal tax brackets would be reduced to 3, 12%, 25%, and 35%. But it's unclear which income levels will be applied to each rate, making it difficult to know how a typical family's tax bill may be affected. The plan also recommends a surcharge for the very wealthy. The standard deduction would nearly double to $12,000 for individuals and $24,000 for families, basically increasing the amount of personal income that would not be taxed. So basically that means that a individual earning $12,000 a year would not pay any taxes, because that would be wiped out. The income would be wiped out by the standard deduction. And also $24,000 for families, that is for couples. If they, of course, they would have, I guess, they have to file jointly. Deductions for mortgage interests and charitable giving would remain, but the plan seeks to end most other itemized deductions. And one of the deductions that they're eliminating is the medical costs, which actually also I don't think is used very often, because you have to have a certain level of expenses before that deduction starts to kick in, and it's pretty high. I know I've never used that deduction, even when I was itemizing. Never was able to use it because the medical costs were not high enough. Trump wants to sign tax legislation into law by the end of the year. Well, we'll see what happens with this. There's going to be a lot of argument over it. But I think the elimination of the state and local income tax deduction is certainly interesting. And it's going to encourage people to move to states with the lower taxes, and I think it will also encourage states to lower their tax rates, because they don't want people moving out of their state. They don't want to lose their tax base. And maybe more states will eliminate their income tax altogether, so as to encourage people to move there. If Pennsylvania now has, I think it says 3 point. Can't quite read it, but Pennsylvania is a very low tax. It's the lowest among its neighbors, and New York is especially high. Look, New York is more than 5% more than, almost 6% more than Pennsylvania. And West Virginia is 6.5. Ohio is 997. And New Jersey also is high. What's New Jersey? 8.97 New Jersey. So all these places, people would be looking at Pennsylvania and say, "Hey, why don't I move across the border to Pennsylvania where I don't have to pay so much taxes?" And we'll see what happens with this. There will be a lot of horse trading and argument over this over the coming months. So we'll follow that and finally see what happens here. All right, let's take a break, and we'll come back with more news from a Chonic perspective after this.
At break of day, in hope we rise, we speak your name.
Car Arms, Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Car Firearms Group. With a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Car Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood, the history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun, to the best in compact concealed carry. Carr Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Carr Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit carr.com today. Carr Arms, Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Carr Firearms Group. With a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Carr Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood. The history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun, to the best in compact concealed carry. Carr Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Carr Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit carr.com today.
At break of day, in hope we rise, we speak your name.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, September 30th, 2017. I'm Tim Elder, sitting in for the second king of Cheonryuk, Hyungjin Moon. And we're going through some of the news this morning. The Health and Human Services Secretary, Tom Price, has resigned after a scandal involving him using government money inappropriately. Here on, again on Breitbart News, Secretary of Health and Human Services Tom Price has resigned, according to the White House, after a series of reports uncovered expensive private flights billed to taxpayers for travel. The White House made the announcement right after the president indicated he would make a decision very soon about Price. I think he's a very fine person. I certainly don't like the optics, Trump said when asked by reporters about the investigation. Quote, I think he's a very fine person. I certainly don't like the optics, Trump said. He added that Price was a very good man. Somehow Breitbart news editor allowed a paragraph to be repeated there. The investigation, spearheaded by Politico, uncovered about $1 million in taxpayer-funded private charter and military planes during the 8 months of his time in office. Wow, $1 million in 8 months. I'm not happy, I can tell you, Trump said. Price tried to apologize for the flights, vowed not to do it again, and even offering to refund taxpayers for some of the cost, but it was apparently not enough for the White House. Trump told reporters that the White House would be putting a stop to cabinet officials traveling on private flights. We put in an order, no more planes, Trump said, pointing out that the Obama administration spent a lot of time and money on airplane flights. He stated at the time that Price had not offered to resign, but said we'll see about the future of his job as HSS Secretary. Approximately 30 minutes later, the White House released a statement announcing Price's resignation. So that didn't take very long. Trump is there to drain the swamp, and so when he finds things like this, he needs to deal with it, and he did. Now, let's see. I see on a Drudge headline that says Obama officials were doing kind of the same thing. This is on Fox News that Drudge is leaking to. The use of private planes by President Trump's cabinet has come under intense media scrutiny in recent days, but officials in the Obama administration also took pricey flights on the government's dime, including for personal trips. Top figures during President Barack Obama's tenure who used non-commercial planes for travel included then Attorney Generals Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch, then FBI Director Robert Mueller, and then CIA Director and Defense Secretary Leon Panetta. Because of their jobs, these officials were required to take government planes for security and communications purposes. Still, critics questioned whether they could have found more cost-effective options and whether all the trips were necessary. The issue of cabinet officials using non-commercial planes resurfaced after the outcry over Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price's repeated use of private planes and military flights for official business. Price resigned from the administration over the scandal Friday. The HHS Secretary, unlike the Defense Secretary and others, is not required to use non-commercial planes. The details of Price's frequent flights drew criticism from the media and the President himself. Before his resignation, Price pledged to repay the government more than $51,000 for his share of the flights, which covers a fraction of the cost, and vowed not to fly private anymore on the job. The flare-up over Price's travel has led to further examination of the travel practices of other Trump officials, including Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt, and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. Like these officials, top figures during the Obama administration raised eyebrows with some of their travel. In 2014, Holder, while Attorney General, boarded a government-owned Gulfstream and flew to the Belmont Stakes, a thoroughbred horse race in New York with his daughters, their boyfriends, and 2 security officers. According to records obtained by the data caller from the Department of Justice, that trip cost the government $14,440. But Holder only had to reimburse the government $955 for that flight, the equivalent cost of a coach commercial airline ticket for each non-law enforcement passenger. At the time, Senator Charles Grassley, Republican of Iowa, the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, criticized Holder and Mueller for their use of expensive Gulfstream V-jets for personal travel. Nobody disputes that the Attorney General and the FBI Director should have access to the secure communications, but, for instance, there's no reason they can't take a less expensive mode of transportation or cut their personal travel, Grassley said. According to statistics provided by a senior administration official, the Trump White House has authorized fewer trips on military planes for senior officials than the Obama administration did during the first 8 months in office. If you look at the Obama administration and you take a look at the amount of time they spent in the air, they spent a lot of time in the air, Trump said Friday, before Price's resignation. From January 20 to September 19, the Trump administration authorized 77 military flights, while the Obama administration authorized 94 flights during the same period, according to the stats. Leon Panetta, who served as both CIA Director and Defense Secretary during the Obama years, frequently used a government airplane to commute back and forth from Washington to California nearly every weekend at taxpayer expense. The Washington Times reported then that each flight cost about $32,000, but Panetta only had to pay $630 per trip because that was the cost of an equivalent round-trip commercial flight. It noted that the government required defense secretaries to use a military plane for travel, and Panetta had the approval of Obama to fly home every weekend. The White House understood when Mr. Panetta took the job that he would return to Monterey to visit his family, as he did when he was director of the CIA, a senior Obama administration official told the newspaper at the time. That's where his family lives, after all. Perhaps the most famous example of an Obama official using a non-commercial plane came when then Attorney General Loretta Lynch met with former President Bill Clinton on June 27, 2016 at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport during the presidential election. The 45-minute encounter on her plane stirred up controversy because the FBI was still investigating Hillary Clinton emails during her tenure as Secretary of State. I do regret sitting down and having a conversation with him because it did give people concern, Lynch later said of the tarmac meeting in a television interview. So, but the fact that Obama administration officials may have done this is not an excuse, because Trump was elected to clear the swamp, drain the swamp, and obviously this kind of thing is the type of thing that taxpayers do not want to be happening. So the fact that it happened in the past is only more reason for it to be stopped, and to stop it once and for all. Here on the Politico, Price becomes the first Trump administration cabinet secretary to step down. And the White House said Trump asked Deputy Assistant Secretary Don Wright to serve as acting secretary of the agency, which has an annual budget of $1.15 trillion and includes the Medicare and Medicaid programs as well as FDA, NIH, and CDC. And this guy, so who is this guy, what was his name, Don Wright, who's going to be acting secretary for a while? He is also a holdover from the Trump administration. And so now, and of course, the Health and Human Services, the big thing for them is Obamacare. So now we have a Obama guy doing Obamacare. Of course, Price had to go, I suppose. Shame on him. Good for Trump. Fire him. But now we have an Obama guy doing Obamacare. I guess that's the way life leads you. Congressional Democrats had attacked Price for advocating spending cuts to the health agencies he oversaw and health care programs while spending taxpayer dollars on private jets. Tom Price did cut the expense of Obamacare by quite a bit. In June, Price defended a proposed fiscal 2018 budget for Health and Human Services that included a $663,000 cut to the agency's $4.9 million annual spending on travel, or roughly 15%. He had also cut the cost of promoting Obamacare, and the number of people who were signing up for Obamacare went down quite a bit during a Price's tenure. But now we have an Obama guy doing Obamacare. Now, here's a story in The Hill. Distrust of Senate grows within the GOP. Perhaps not so surprising. A day after the GOP presented a united front around the rollout of President Trump's tax plan, House Republicans are expressing deep reservations about the Senate's ability to get the job done. Lawmakers stung over the failure to pass Obamacare repeal worry the same fate could befall the tax measure if a handful of senators raise objections. Donald Trump won with an electoral landslide, and his three big campaign points were Obamacare repeal, tax reform, and border security. For a handful of senators to derail that agenda is very frustrating, said Representative Blake Farenthold, Republican of Texas, and Republican of Oklahoma. Tom Cole, who is close to the House GOP leadership, says colleagues are frustrated with a handful of senators overruling the will of the entire House. We do need to see them step up and actually deliver for a change. We have over 200 bills sitting stalled over there. They haven't been able to deliver on health care reform, and they all ran on it, and now we have a do-or-die moment on tax reform, he said. There's also a sense among House Republicans that their Senate brethren aren't under the same pressure to get results, perhaps because the GOP's majority in the Senate is seen as safer in the 2018 midterm elections than the House majority. They put our majority in jeopardy with their failures. That's what the House Republicans are upset that the Senate is not getting things done, and perhaps making it more difficult for the Republicans in the House to get reelected next year. But that's the way the American government works, inefficiently. And that's why we want more and more of the functions of government transferred to the private sector. Let's take a break here, and we'll come back in a minute or so with more news from a Chonika perspective.
Car Arms, Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Car Firearms Group, with a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Car Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood, the history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun, to the best in compact concealed carry. Car Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Car Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit car.com today.
Little hands, shoeless feet, lonely eyes looking back at me. Will we leave behind the innocent to grieve? On their own, on the run, when their lives have only begun. These could be our daughters and our sons. And just like a drum, I can hear their hearts beating. I know my God won't let them be defeated.
At break of day, in hope we rise, we speak your name.
Okay, we're about that time of day when we have to talk about China. This is the King's Report for Saturday, September 30th, 2017. And there are a few articles about China this morning. First of all, China orders Muslim families in Xinjiang to hand over Qurans and prayer mats. Yeah, this is how they deal with Muslim people in China. Radio Free Asia reported this week that some Uyghur Muslims in China's westernmost province of Xinjiang have accused the police of confiscating the Qurans, claiming the seminal Islamic text contains extremist content. The Chinese have read the content, and they discovered what was in it. Maybe we should do the same in America. Xinjiang is home to a Uyghur Muslim separatist movement, and the Chinese government has previously claimed citizens from Xinjiang have left to the Middle East to join the Islamic State. In response, the Communist Party has cracked down significantly on public displays of faith, including publicly fasting during Ramadan or wearing Islamic garb on public transportation. Radio Free Asia cites Dilzat Razit, World Uyghur Congress spokesman, as having seen orders from police on the social media platform WeChat ordering families to hand over their Qurans and prayer mats, according to, among other religious paraphernalia. All Qurans and related items must be handed in to the authorities, and there are notices to this effect being broadcast via WeChat, Razit told the outlet. We received a notification saying that every single ethnic Uyghur must hand in any Islam-related items from their own home, including Qurans, prayers, and anything else bearing the symbols of religion. They have been handed in voluntarily. They have to be handed in voluntarily. If they aren't handed in and they are found, then there will be harsh punishments. So a little bit of a different understanding of voluntarism, isn't there? What it voluntarily means, voluntarily at the point of a gun. RFA adds that sources on the ground have seen instances of confiscations involving non-Uyghur Muslims in the region as well, such as Kazakh and Kyrgyz Muslims. Officials at village, township, and county level are confiscating all Qurans and the special mats used for prayer, a Kazakh source had told the outlet. RFA adds that officials in the region began confiscating Qurans this year, citing their extremist content, but had only extended the ban to Qurans published more than 5 years ago, attempting to replace them with government-approved copies. In other words, Communist Party approved copies. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has denied the report as groundless allegations and rumors. Asked about claims that Chinese police were confiscating prayer materials, spokesman Lu Kang told reporters, "We hope relevant parties refrain from making groundless allegations and rumors," adding that the situation on the ground in Xinjiang was sound. On Friday, the Chinese state media outlet Xinhua published a story on life in Xinjiang, not designated a response to the RFA article, but apparently meant to dispel the appearances that police did not allow Uyghurs to live in their territory and practice their culture peacefully. The article, titled "Live the Real Life of Uyghurs in a Xinjiang Resort," highlights Kazangchi, a village that allows tourists to live among the Uyghur people as colleagues, eat local food, and enjoy traditional music. The article does not mention Muslims or Islam at all, despite the fact that most Uyghurs are practicing Muslims. The Chinese Communist Party publication People's Daily did announce this week new security measures for Xinjiang. The Communist Party decreed the use of new high-tech body security scanners to enhance counterterrorism work. The scanners will reportedly appear on Xinjiang's roads, and individuals will be forced to undergo routine security checks through the scanners when reaching police checkpoints on the road. Residents of Bayangol, a prefecture of Xinjiang, must already install a GPS tracking system on their cars to ensure that police know where they are at all times, at a cost of $13 per person to the resident. Additionally, the Chinese government has severely restricted the practice of Islam throughout the state, from banning Muslim names like Muhammad and Arafat to forcing shops to sell haram items such as cigarettes and alcohol, and promoted ethnic unity campaigns meant to dilute Uyghur identity by promoting intermarriage and imposing Mandarin over the Uyghur language. So, and here actually China's Xi Jinping, President Xi Jinping, says something interesting here, that Chinese people can study capitalism, but Marxism remains the top. Remember that the Chinese Communist Party is coming up now on the National Congress opening on the 18th. And so everything in China right now is really focused on that, because Xi Jinping is trying to elevate his power, to concentrate the power on himself through that Congress. And it's a very, very important event for him. And coming out, this is a Reuters article coming out of Beijing. Communist Party members should study contemporary capitalism, but must never deviate from Marxism, Chinese President Xi Jinping said, offering a clear signal that there will be no weakening of party control weeks ahead of a key Congress opening. The party brooks no challenge to its rule, and Xi has overseen a sweeping crackdown on civil society since assuming power almost 5 years ago, tightening the party's grip over the internet, media, and security infrastructure, and locking up rights lawyers and dissidents. Speaking at a study session of the Politburo, one of the party's elite ruling bodies, Xi said that while times are changing and society is developing, the basic tenets of Marxism remain true, state news agency Xinhua said last Friday. Read Das Kapital, Marx's seminal work. The basic tenets of Marxism, they weren't true to begin with. That book is really full of ridiculous things, for example, the chick and the eggshell involved in a class struggle. Anyway, if we deviate from or abandon Marxism, our party would lose its soul and direction, Xi said. See, that's the thing here. It's not about the ideology. It's about maintaining the structure and the organization, because it's the organization and structure that gives power and control. On the fundamental issue of upholding the guiding role of Marxism, we must maintain unswerving resolve, never wavering at any time, under any circumstances. Okay. It's not going to work. She said the party should better integrate the basic tenets of Marxism with the reality of contemporary China and learn from the achievements of other civilizations to create and develop Marxism, Xinhua said. She also asked party members to study contemporary capitalism, its essence and patterns, the report added, without elaborating. What would Marx say to that? What would Marx say to saying, so, okay, we like Marxism is the top and the be-all and the end-all, but we should also study contemporary capitalism. I think Marx would have to be turning in his grave about now. China has transformed its economy since it began landmark reforms in the late 1970s because it brought in capitalism and is now the world's second largest economy. Private firms are now supported and encouraged, but the state-owned sector remains a major driver of growth and investment, though some industries like iron and steel are suffering from worryingly high levels of overcapacity. Well, that's an understatement. She said the party must continuously develop socialism with Chinese characteristics, continuously enhance China's comprehensive national strength, and fully demonstrate the advantages of China's socialist system. Next month's Party Congress, which opens on October 18th, will see she further cement his grip on power and usher in a new generation of senior leaders, says Reuters. China in the 19th century also tried a situation where they said, okay, we'll keep the traditional system, but we'll adopt Western, some of the Western external organizational forms. But we're not going to adopt their Western philosophy or their Western religion, just their external forms. So here again, China right now is trying to adopt capitalism without political reform, without giving people a say in how they are governed. And more you're going to find people dissatisfied with that. As people become more affluent, they want more say in the policies of the country. And so this idea of the Chinese Communist Party maintaining its grip on the government and the military of China cannot last forever. It's a house of cards that has to collapse. It has to collapse. This kind of dictatorship has always collapsed in history. So we'll see what happens during this Party Congress. So we're going to be watching that Party Congress very closely to see how much Xi Jinping is going to be able to concentrate power in his own hands. His goal right now, apparently, is to elevate himself in the Communist Party charter, which is effectively China's constitution, to the same level as Deng Xiaoping, and perhaps even as to the same level as Mao Zedong. So that we'll see what happens there. And this speech also is a part of the effort to accomplish that. Let's see, let's look at some of the other headlines of China. China also purged someone who was recently, who was some time back was expected to be a successor to Xi, and so anyone who sort of becomes in the focus with as being a successor seems to be in danger of being purged. But we have to see what kind of new leadership will arise from the October Congress. Secretary Tillerson is in China now to discuss North Korea and also a visit by President Trump. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson met with Chinese President Xi Jinping and other officials Saturday on issues including trade, North Korea, and preparations for an anticipated visit by President Donald Trump to China in November. Tillerson told top Chinese policy advisors Yang Jiechi that Trump and Xi had developed a very regular and close working relationship. His visit, Tillerson said, also provided an opportunity to assess progress being made between the sides since Xi and Trump met in April at the U.S. President's estate in Florida. Tillerson is making his second visit as Secretary of State to the world's number 2 economy and chief American rival for influence in Asia and increasingly the world. Along with Xi and Yang, he met with Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who told Tillerson that the Chinese-U.S. relations overall have a positive momentum and have arrived at an important opportunity to progress further. And neither Tillerson nor the Chinese officials mentioned North Korea in opening remarks made in the presence of journalists. But I suspect that North Korea was mentioned behind closed doors. Of course, they would have to be, because that's the most important issue right now between the United States and China. Trump has been pressing for tougher measures on Pyongyang from China, North Korea's chief trading partner. Although adamantly opposed to steps that could bring down Kim's regime, Beijing appears increasingly willing to tighten the screws on Pyongyang and agree to tough new United Nations sanctions that would substantially cut foreign revenue for the isolated North. On Thursday, Beijing ordered North Korean-owned businesses and ventures with Chinese partners to close by early January, days after it said it would cut off gas and limit shipments of refined petroleum products effective January 1. It made no mention of crude oil, which makes up the bulk of Chinese energy supplies to North Korea and is not covered by the UN sanctions. China has also banned imports of North Korean coal, or iron and lead ore, and seafood since early September. Still, Washington hopes China will exert even greater pressure, even while Beijing says the impasse can't be solved by sanctions alone and calls on Washington to cool its rhetoric in open dialogue with Pyongyang. Other than North Korea, the U.S. and China have other security concerns to address that remain at odds over Beijing's military buildup and assertive claims to the disputed islands in the South China Sea. Tillerson is also expected to restate concerns about China's massive trade surplus with the U.S., $347 billion last year, and what American companies say are unfair barriers to investment, including pressure to hand over their technology. Washington wants Beijing to make good on its promise to let market forces have a bigger role in its economy, give equal treatment to foreign Chinese companies, and roll back state industry's dominance. But Xi Jinping just got through saying that we're not going to give up Marxism, that we'll study capitalism and we will adapt Marxism to fit the modern era by studying capitalism and other ideas, these foreign, strange ideas, but we're not going to give up on Marxism. Primarily, though, what he's talking about is we're not going to give up on the one-party dictatorship model of governance. That's primarily what he's talking about. We'll see how far that goes, but it can't go on forever. All right, let's take a break now. We'll come back with more news from a Chonika perspective.
At break of day, in hope we rise, we speak your name.
Little hands, shoeless feet, lonely eyes looking back at me. Will we leave behind the innocent to grieve? On their own, on the run, when their lives have only begun. These could be our daughters and our sons. And just like a drum, I can hear their hearts beating. I know my God
And welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, September 30th, 2017, 8th year of Chungi, 8th month and the 11th day on the heavenly calendar. Let's go through some of the other headlines I see here on Drudge. Some of the links. Oprah Winfrey may or may not be running for president in 2020. Speculation swirls, but she insists that she's not running. Talk radio host nailed with a $274 million defamation verdict. Cumulus Media debt troubles. Los Angeles' legendary palm trees are dying. Star Trek introducing first gay character. And here's one that talks about, is about what I was talking about, the Illinois Exodus, the tax killer. Talked about in the previous hour about the differences in state income taxes and how that can lead people to move from one state or another. And that's happening in Illinois. Fed up Illinois homeowners consider moving. It's not just the property taxes on my home, it's all of them. So in Illinois, the property taxes have skyrocketed because the Illinois state government is trying to get out of a financial hole that they've dug for themselves, and now the people of Illinois are having to pay for that with their much higher property taxes. This is a Chicago Tribune article. Even after watching Hurricane Irma wreak havoc on Florida, Rick Mallon is sticking to his plan. Mallon is fixing up his Villa Park home so that he can sell it, move to the Florida Panhandle, and escape Illinois' rising taxes. I'm getting out, said Mallon, 67. It's not just the property taxes on my home, it's all of them. He figures his taxes in Florida, where there's no personal income tax, will be about a quarter of what he's paying now. See there? If a person can save 75% on their taxes by moving from one state to another, they're going to do it. Mallon's not the only one leaving the state. In 2016, Illinois lost 37,508 people, putting the state's population at its lowest level in nearly a decade, according to U.S. Census data. It was the third consecutive year the state lost more residents than any other state. The state's population count for 2017 won't be released until December. Some of those who are leaving Illinois say they're frustrated with their tax burden and the state's financial situation. After going more than 2 years without a budget, Illinois lawmakers passed a spending plan over the summer, one that involved a 32% income tax hike for residents. The state is still digging itself out of the financial disarray that accumulated during their budget impasse. A Forbes listing of the best and worst states for taxes in 2016, before the tax hike, ranked Illinois 46th, signifying a heavier tax burden. But demographers aren't ready to chalk up the out-migration up to tax pressures entirely. Brookings Institution demographer William Frey said that when people move, it's usually for employment and not necessarily because of taxes. Most of the people moving are in their 20s and 30s, are establishing themselves in their careers, and are relocating for job opportunities. When you have more people moving out than in, it means the employment is elsewhere, Frey said. Regardless of whether or not they are the primary factor behind the relocations, high tax rates still affect the housing market by cutting into the amount of money residents have to spend. Lance Romella, president of the Housing Trends, a Chicago-based housing market consultant, said weak growth in the Chicago economy, unresolved government fiscal issues, and high taxes are all tied together and are resulting in a stagnant housing market. Entry-level buyers shop based on what they can afford monthly, Romella said. Ultimately, if those shopping for homes can't afford the mortgage payments plus taxes, they'll settle for lower-priced residences. They may even skip buying a home altogether if there aren't enough affordable homes on the market. This could cause a deterioration in the housing prices, he said. Housing construction already is being affected, he said. With construction costs high and demand muted, only 7,511 single-family homes were built in the Chicago metro area during the 12 months ending with July. Before the recession, 40,000 new homes were being constructed each year. Normal demand is closer to 15,000 to 20,000 new homes a year, Romella said. We really need stability in our government, and I don't know how that's going to happen, he said. Rumela contrasted most of the Chicago metro area with Lake County, Indiana, which has experienced heavy housing growth that Rumela attributes to a flight from Illinois taxes. Housing construction in northwest Indiana increased 18% this year over last, and in 2016 the number was up 19% over 2015. Meanwhile, Cook County is down 6% this year over last, and home construction in many other Illinois communities is flat, he said. DuPage County experienced an upturn of 5.9% this year. Sheila Tracy, a Chicago optician, said the recent income tax hike, as well as the sweetened beverage tax implemented by Cook County in August, both seem like desperate government attempts to deal with unresolved financial problems. It was the last straw, said Tracy, who plans to relocate away from the state once she retires in 3 years. They say the soda tax is about my health, but they aren't fooling people. Cook County's commissioners are expected to vote on repealing the sweetened beverage tax October 10th, though it's unclear at this point if there are enough votes to overturn the measure. Even though it's difficult to determine how much of an impact tax concerns are having on real estate, the weakness in the housing market is clear, said Geoff Smith, Executive Director of the Institute for Housing Studies at DePaul University. Home prices in many major metropolitan areas have recovered and hit new highs since the 2008 housing crash. But in Chicago area, only a few suburbs and select city neighborhoods have rebounded, he said. According to CoreLogic, a global property information firm, the Chicago area is one of the U.S. metropolitan areas with the highest percentage of homeowners underwater with their mortgages, meaning they owe more than their homes are worth. During the second quarter of this year, 10.8% of residences in the Chicago metro area were underwater, compared with 13.5% during the second quarter of 2016, according to CoreLogic. The day after Illinois legislature voted to raise the individual income tax from 3.75% to 4.95%, Northfield-based financial planner Ellen Rogan said she started getting phone calls from clients who are residents of Chicago with second homes in Florida. The clients, according to Rogan, were saying, "I'm worried about Illinois. Should I be moving to Florida?" Rogan said anyone considering a move has to look at lifestyle, not just taxes. Chicago certified public accountant Debbie Lesson said that when people consider a move for tax reasons in retirement, they may be missing a crucial element of Illinois' tax system. Illinois doesn't tax retirement income, Social Security, pensions, and IRAs, an advantageous provision for retirees living in the state, she said. BMO Private Bank Chief Investment Officer Jack Ablin is among those with residences in both Chicago and Florida. The seriousness of Illinois' budget and tax issues became clear to him, he said, when he tried to sell his Highland Park home a couple of years ago. The house was on the market for a year and priced right, he said, but potential buyers kept raising concerns about property taxes. So that's what's happening in Illinois, because of the taxes, or because of other reasons too, but taxes are certainly a part of it. They're in a lot of trouble, and for the second year in a row, they were the state where had the highest out-migration, more people moving out of the state than from any other state. Also linked on Drudge is a New York Times article. Headline is 110 million Americans have sexually transmitted disease. Yikes. Got to keep that sexual purity, abstinence before marriage, and fidelity in marriage. The New York Times says the incidence of chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis is increasing, according to a new report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. An estimated 110 million Americans now are affected with a sexually transmitted disease. Chlamydia is the most common sexually transmitted STD, and the number of cases rose 4.7% from 2015 to 16. The increases occurred nationwide. Rates were highest in the South and lowest in the Northeast. Chlamydia is usually asymptomatic, and the number of reported cases may have grown in part because of newer, more sensitive screening techniques. Adolescents and young adult women have the highest rates of chlamydia. One survey found that 9.2% of girls aged 15 to 19 were infected. as were 8% of women aged 20 to 24. Rates declined 3.5% during rates declined 3.5% among African Americans and 6.4% among Native Americans and Alaska Natives, but chlamydia still is most common in these groups. Rates rose among all other races and ethnicities. From 2015 to 16, gonorrhea infections increased to 22.2% among men and 13.8% among women. Well, that's a huge increase over a year. From 2015 to 2016, gonorrhea infections increased 22% among men and 13.8% among women. Wow. Almost 92% of cases are in people 15 to 44 years old. The only recommended treatment is to take 2 antibiotics simultaneously. Resistance to azithromycin is becoming more common, however, and there is some evidence of growing resistance to ceftriaxone as well. New drug trials are going on now that we hope will provide new treatments for gonorrhea, said Dr. Gail Boland. But these treatments trials take years, and we don't know if these new drugs will be safe and effective. The rate of primary and secondary syphilis in 2016 is the highest it's been since 1993, and it increased among both men and women from 2015 to 2016. Men account for almost 90% of cases, and most are among men who have sex with men. Rates of syphilis increased in every age group at all races, and they were highest among people in their 20s. The number of babies being infected with syphilis increased to 628 cases in 2016 from 492 in 2015, each case, in Dr. Boland's words, a needless tragedy. The enormity of the STD epidemic requires everyone to play a role in reversing these trends, Boland said. Wow. I'm really shocked by this one statistics. Gonorrhea infections increasing 22% in 1 year. I don't know what's going on there. Well, of course, I do know what's going on there, but something is really happening in America that would cause this kind of an increase. And that's 22% among men and 13% among women. Just over 1 year. Just over 1 year. And it says that the 110 million Americans have some kind of a sexually transmitted disease. The sexual organs are the palace of love, and the palace where God comes into that relationship between a man and a woman, and where God's purpose of creation is realized. And of course, Satan has worked very hard to make that something dirty, and to defile it, and to make it a situation where disease is transmitted. So it becomes a palace of disease rather than a palace of love. I think the only way, of course, to deal with this is to have just one sexual partner during your entire lifetime. That is to not have, to abstain from sex prior to marriage, and then to be faithful to your spouse during marriage. And to develop your sexual organs as the palace of love that they were intended to be. All right, let's take another break, and we'll be back in a minute or so with more news from a Chinooka perspective.
At break of day, in hope we rise, we speak your name.
Car Arms, Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Car Firearms Group. With a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Car Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood, the history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun to the best in compact concealed carry, Carr Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Carr Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit carr.com today.
At break of day, in hope we rise, we speak your name.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, September 30th, 2017. Tim Elder sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Youngjin Moon. During this segment, I wanted to go through a story in the National Review. The headline is, yes, the U.S. Navy can shoot down North Korean ICBMs. This is written by Henry F. Cooper, who I believe was, let me go down here to the bio here. Yes, Henry F. Cooper served in the Reagan administration as ambassador and chief defense and space negotiator with the Soviet Union, and in the George H.W. Bush administration as director of the Strategic Defense Initiative. And so he knows something about missiles and anti-missile missiles and so forth. And he says that, yeah, the U.S. already has the capability, more or less. So let's see what he says. It's North Korea continues to test its nuclear weapons and its means to deliver them, including the intercontinental ballistic missiles that can reach America. We clearly need the best ballistic missile defense system possible. Even with this urgent need, some think we still have time because they think that North Korea still must develop greater accuracy and the means to re-enter the atmosphere before it can threaten us. In the Wall Street Journal, I recently observed that North Korea could detonate nuclear weapons above the atmosphere to produce an electromagnetic pulse and shut down the electric power grid indefinitely. Following such a burst over America, millions could die from starvation, disease, and societal collapse. So what's happening in Puerto Rico will be just minor compared to what would happen if this kind of a action by North Korea were to succeed. To detonate a nuclear weapon above the atmosphere and produce an electromagnetic pulse that would basically wipe out a lot of the power grid. Now, some people say that the power grid has been improved so that it won't have that effect, but I don't think we want to find out. And I think we want to be ready for the possibility that it does happen. So, yeah, be ready to drink creek water, folks. Get the filters that you need to drink the water out of the creek and out of these ponds and so forth, because we may be doing that. Guess what? North Korea recently highlighted its interest in a high-altitude, super powerful EMP attack as a strategic goal. As in 2012 and 2016, it could launch a satellite to approach us from our most undefended south, this time with a nuke on board. We need to enhance our limited ground-based BMD, that would be ballistic missile defense system in Alaska and California. Aegis BMD ships deployed around the world can augment that homeland defense capability, but a false narrative is being spread in numerous articles that these ships cannot shoot down ICBMs, except possibly in their terminal phase as they approach their targets. That myth is a legacy of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which made it illegal to defend the American people against ballistic missiles. That's right. And it explains here, the United States bet on the doctrine of mutual assured destruction, or MAD, which promised that we would destroy the Soviet Union if it attacked us. This was, I don't know, it was just by the grace of God that we got through the Cold War. Because during the Cold War, it was illegal for the United States government to set up a system to protect Americans. It was illegal because of something called the ABM Treaty, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. But now, with North Korea, we find that we need to be able to shoot down a missile. It was my privilege to serve as President Reagan's chief defense and space negotiator, defending his Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, while learning all about the ABM Treaty as the cornerstone of our strategic stability, as the Soviets and the U.S. liberal elite had described it. Then, as President George H.W. Bush's SDI director, I advocated a global protection against limited strikes, a mission including a new role for theater missile defense systems to protect our overseas troops, friends, and allies. The ABM Treaty permitted TMD systems, so I advised, that is theater missile defense systems, so I advised Admiral Frank Kelso, the Chief of Naval Operations, to ensure that Aegis BMD efforts were limited to building a TMD capability. Otherwise, MAD acolytes who were committed to the ABM Treaty would kill it in the cradle. Fortunately, that strategy to secure the political viability of Aegis BMD worked, but perhaps too well. Many mistakenly think that Aegis BMD can do no more than provide TMD capability. Even after President George W. Bush withdrew from the ABM Treaty in 2002, little was done to make Aegis BMD all that we thought it could be in the early 1990s. Nevertheless, in early 2008, when a threatening satellite was shortly to re-enter Earth's atmosphere, President Bush chose Aegis BMD to shoot it down before its toxic fuel could threaten folks on the ground. In a heroic, concerted effort dubbed the Burnt Frost mission, the Navy succeeded in destroying the satellite, an uncooperative target traveling faster than an ICBM. The challenge was difficult because the operational Aegis system sensors at that time needed augmentation by other target tracking information to cue the missile interceptor, Standard Missile 3 Block 1A SM-31A, into the battle space and close enough to its high-velocity target to enable the Navy's hit-to-kill vehicle interceptor. Many agencies worked together to meet this urgent ad hoc challenge, as discussed in this video, in a video that is linked to. This challenge will be much less difficult today because the Navy's launch on remote and engage on remote capabilities can enable such intercepts and would be instrumental in defending against North Korean ICBMs. Launch on remote refers to the use of sensors to enable the captain of a given Aegis BMD ship to launch its interceptors before the radar on the same ship picks up the attacking target. Engage on remote refers to the fact that today's interceptors need not be guided to their targets by the ship that launches them. If Burnt Frost were undertaken today, it would employ a network of sensors operated by competent, usually military personnel. Claims that Aegis BMD interceptors must be launched from near the launch site of the threatening missiles are false. There is no reason for a tail chase, as some authors have claimed. It would be obvious to quail hunters that Aegis BMD ships can have side shot opportunities from many locations against rockets on the rise above the atmosphere and later in their descent phase. Almost a decade after President Bush gave the Burnt Frost mission to a competent team employing an Aegis BMD ship, President Trump should now direct his BMD team to ensure that Aegis BMD ships operate in locations from which they can shoot down North Korea's ICBMs, both going up and coming down. Faster velocity interceptors would improve this Aegis BMD capability. Lighter weight kill vehicles with a final stage thrust capability can provide increased velocity without requiring a major redesign of Aegis infrastructure. Employing such lightweight technology from the SDI era would be less expensive than building a larger diameter interceptor, as some recommend. So this gentleman says that he knows what he's talking about, and that the U.S. can shoot down North Korean ICBMs with the Aegis systems if they just have to be augmented somewhat. And we hope that someone will take a look at this in the Pentagon and will assess it and see if that is what needs to be done. really the United States now needs to have anti-missile capability, not just for North Korea, but eventually a terrorist group is going to get a hold of a missile, a nuclear missile, and this electric magnetic pulse thing also. This is something as well that a terrorist group could accomplish, especially if they have a large backing from someone like from a country such as Iran, which certainly is backing these kinds of efforts. Right now, a lot of people are spending a lot of hours trying to figure out a way to destroy New York and destroy the United States. And so far, the U.S. intelligence services and FBI have been able to block those efforts. But one of those efforts is going to succeed, or at least be attempted sooner or later. And we need to be prepared. We need to be prepared, especially as the judgment period goes on, next 3.5 years. We need to be very well prepared for that kind of an outcome. Let's look at some of the other headlines on Drudge. See if there's anything interesting here. Weekend, Catalonia braces for independence vote. Yes, this weekend, that is tomorrow, the Catalonia area in Spain is going to be voting on whether or not they want to become independent. Now, President Trump has said that the United States supports a united Spain. I think that's kind of an unfortunate statement by him. I don't see why we should become involved in this one way or the other. But he did that recently. This is a report in the New York Times out of Teresa, Spain. A 6-foot certain man, Sabate, I guess, how you pronounce his name, a 6'8" giant of a man, folded himself into a cafe chair in this Catalan city and fixed his eyes at a point on the horizon. He was thinking about Sunday, when Catalan leaders have scheduled a vote on separating from Spain. Vast numbers of Catalans are hurtling toward a confrontation. Spanish security forces have moved into the region on cruise ships under orders to halt the vote by force. But Mr. Juanico, 59, a counselor in a psychiatric hospital, shrugged off the threat of violence as if it were a detail. He looked serene, almost blissful. All my life I had the dream of dying in an independent country, he said. It was a dream that used to seem very remote, but now it is very near. Father a few times said that he would like to spend even a minute in Chunuguk Nation before passing. In an age of fragmentation, the Catalan referendum stands apart. Unlike the Kurds who voted overwhelmingly this week to separate from Iraq, Catalans who live in an autonomous region in Spain's northeast are not driven by an external threat or oppression. They live well in the prosperous heart of Europe. Their grievances are old and bone-deep, reawakened by political movements both in Catalonia and in Madrid, magnified by partisan news media on both sides and accelerated by the Spanish government's blunt, reflective clampdown. That it has progressed to this dangerous point is a testament to the power of a nationalist narrative. It unfolded so naturally. Older people are worried that the young did not fully understand the risk they were taking. You see how it is going to end, Mr. Juanico's mother, Serafina Sabate, 89. She said it sharply. Under the fascist government of Franco, her father was imprisoned for 6 years for producing fabric for the Republican army. She asked her grandson, who was elated about the vote, what he would do if the government sent tanks. Look, well, we have lived through a war, Ms. Sabate said, her voice shaking. If people go to the street, if someone does something against the state, they will jump on him. Anyone who has lived through the war wants these days to pass by. The city of Teresa, an old textile manufacturing center just outside Barcelona, seemed preternaturally calm last week. The sidewalk cafes full and a yearly theater festival underway. Under the surface, however, there was a sense of approaching collision, one that was days away and then hours. The mayor had mostly disappeared from public view, explaining in a Facebook post that he had come under a torrent of abuse when he had tried to remain neutral on the vote. Elementary school principals had received letters warning that they might face sedition charges if they opened their doors for voting. Teenage activists, joyful, full of expectation, talked about blocking security forces with their bodies. "We have been waiting for this moment for 300 years, said Guillaume Carbonel Vidal, 18, who is studying to be a theater technician. He was excited and sleep-deprived, having spent the past week running from one political meeting to another, debating such matters as whether to print a new currency and nationalize the banks. I am 18 and I will be able to live the way I want, he said. We will be able to build a new future. We have to build a society that is anti-patriarchal, where women don't have to suffer violence, which anyway is created by men, and where the working class has power. The last few weeks, he said, have been a dream. Opinion polls suggest that about half of Catalonia's 7.5 million people support breaking away from Spain, but the separatists' influence ballooned in 2015 when independence parties won a majority in the region's parliament. There was already resentment that the Spanish government was siphoning too much of the region's wealth. Madrid, which allowed a non-binding referendum on independence in 2014, has taken a hard line this time, arguing that a unilateral act of separation flies in the face of the rule of law and sets a dangerous precedent for other European countries struggling with similar movements. All right, that's about enough of that, I think. We'll be looking to see what happens tomorrow. We'll be reporting this, I imagine, on the King's Report on Monday. By that time, the results of the vote, if there is a vote, will be in. Madrid authorities are saying that they're going to occupy the polling places, that they're going to arrest people who open these places. Like this article said, the principals of elementary schools received a letter saying that they could be charged with sedition if they open their doors of their schools for voting on Sunday. And millions of ballots have been confiscated, but the Catalonian authorities say that the vote will proceed. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. This is a trend, certainly. Decentralization of power. Decentralization of power. All right, let's take a break, and we'll come back with more news in a final segment after this.
Car Arms, Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Car Firearms Group, with a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Car Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood, the history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun, to the best in compact concealed carry. Car Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Car Firearms Group, made in the USA. Visit car.com today.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, September 30th, 2017. I'm looking at a story that don't understand too much because it's very, very different from my experience. Anyway, this is a story. The headline is, more colleges add free food pantries as starving student cliche becomes reality. I don't know. When I went to college in southern Wisconsin, and there was never a problem with food. In fact, what was it? The freshman 10 or the freshman 15, where people, when they leave home and go to college, they usually gain weight, 10 or 15 pounds or something like that, or is it 20 pounds? I don't know. As you go to the cafeteria and you eat, but I guess this is something different. Steve Huang had more than schoolwork to fret about. His first year of college, he went hungry. I lost 25 pounds, said UC Irvine sophomore. It was one of the biggest worries that I wouldn't have enough to eat. The tall, thin 18-year-old was among hundreds of students who lined up this past week to take a peek at UCI's newly expanded food pantry intended to help students like him. Across Southern California and the region, colleges and universities no longer view the concept of the starving student as an inevitable joke, but a serious issue. To address what's become known as food insecurity, campuses are opening up free pantries. Some are as small as closets. In fact, UCLA's pantry is called the food closet. Others began small and grow. Cal State San Bernardino on Thursday dedicated their renamed Obershaw Den Pantry, which was remodeled and has added refrigeration for perishables. A day earlier, the UCI campus celebrated an opening of a remodeled pantry touted as the biggest in the UC system. At more than 1,800 square feet, it features not only free food and toiletries, but sitting areas, a kitchenette with small appliances, and a space for weekly food demonstrations and nutrition talks. So what happened to the cafeterias in these places? Today's students don't all fit in the stereotypes of an 18-year-old single person. Many are returning to school as an older student, some with families to support. Oh, I see. Okay, that makes more sense then. For many students, it's not easy navigating the new terrain of college life. Some don't want to burden their parents by asking for more financial help. Right. Come on. Yeah, I'll bet. Others know their parents, perhaps struggling themselves, can't give more. But, there is such a thing as scholarships, and there is such a thing as part-time jobs. Still not understanding this article. That's fake news, though. Don't want to burden their parents by asking for more financial help. Have young people grown halos around their heads or something? Anyway, let's not go there. Because no one has been doing the research, we don't have comparable data to know whether it has changed over time, Crutchfield said. Studies and educators note that those who go hungry may also not have a place to sleep. They can find themselves crashing on a friend's couch or sleeping in their cars. Cal State Northridge is among Southern California's colleges that have developed partnerships with community organizations to address food insecurity. Really? I mean, why not just go out and get a job? And the state university system is looking to work with more partners to address housing insecurity, said Denise Beverly, director of the CSU System's Student Wellness and Basic Needs Initiative. How the pantries operate and what they offer varies. Fullerton College, possibly the first in Orange County to create a pantry, relies on donations and volunteers to serve some 63 to 70 students every Tuesday, said Adela Lopez, a retired professor emeritus who helped start the program. For a lot of these students, it's been generational poverty. A lot of them are eligible for help, and they don't know about CalFresh, Lopez said, referring to a government program that provides monthly food benefits to those who qualify. And the UC system president, Janet Napolitano, last year approved $3.3 million in new funding over 2 years to expand food pantry storage and access and expand student support services. Among other things, each campus received $151,000 in addition to $75,000 allocated in 2015. So more government spending, more government spending. I know it's tough getting through college and making the finance, especially because the cost is so high. And of course, the rising cost has something to do with the rising availability of loans. The easier it is to get loans, the more colleges know that they can charge, and so they charge what they know they can charge. The whole student debt thing is a really a terrible situation where people are basically saddled with this debt for 20 years or more. In other words, until they're in their 40s. The whole college situation needs to be looked at again. I think people should look at ways to get through college without going into debt, and without. And if this starving student thing is reality in any place other than California, then people also need to look at that as well. Why not go to a place that is near your parents' home, where you can get at least a free room, if not board, and get a job and help pay the household finances, so as to help your parents, but also look for ways to get through college without getting into debt, so that you can start fresh when you get out. Okay. Paw in Order, scientists team to catch cat serial killer. Born to Run and Run on Broadway. OJ hiding millions offshore. I don't think we really care about OJ anymore, do we? Trump unraveling Obama's drone rules. Let's see what that's about. In Libya strike, military shows new lethal powers under Trump. The White House has slowly rolled back Obama-era restrictions on drone strikes, shown for the first time in a deadly strike against Islamic State group fighters. The U.S. forces in Africa this week staged what would have been an otherwise unremarkable attack. Let me increase the font size just a bit. Against Islamic State extremists, but for one key detail. The operation was the first to rely on authorities granted under the Trump administration that allow the military to conduct lethal strike outside a designated war zone and without explicit White House approval in advance. An airstrike carried out on Tuesday in Libya killed several fighters from the Islamic State group, also known as ISIS, according to a Thursday statement from U.S. Africa Command. It followed a similar drone strike last week that Trump personally approved, the first in Libya since the one President Barack Obama authorized in January, the day before he stepped down from office. But the latest operation is unique in that it did not take place in an area of active hostilities, a term the Obama administration used to clarify where the U.S. is and is not at war, and perhaps more importantly, where military commanders, not the president or his immediate team, would determine whether a drone strike or other deadly operation was appropriate. The rules that govern Tuesday's strike show how much more power the military now has to determine where it can go after terrorist networks, and it follows recent reports that the administration seeks to increase the authority of the military and the CIA to conduct drone operations. I'm feeling a little bit uneasy here that the military can conduct drone operations outside of areas where active combat is going on. How long will it be before they start doing this domestically? I have some concern there. That the military can now carry out such operations raises new questions about the general limits of its power in Africa and elsewhere. What now stops the Defense Department from carrying out drone strikes wherever it wants? That's a good question. Until early this year, a still classified portion of Libya was determined to be an area of active hostilities, as well as is still the case in a part of Somalia outside the capital, Mogadishu. Multiple sources who spoke to U.S. News confirm that designation for Libya has expired. Trump announced in March that he would give the military more flexibility to swiftly target extremists, curbing micromanagement from the White House. Now that's good because the problem with America's wars in the post-World War II era has been that they have been micromanaged to some extent or another from the White House, and that, for example, in Vietnam, we lost not because of military, but because of the political leaders in the White House, and of course because of the way that the media reported on that war, drumming up an anti-war sentiment in the United States. So for the military to be able to do what it takes to win a war, once it is told, okay, go there, go to this area and win, then they can go in there and do that. But this means this is a situation where the government and the military is going after terrorists or other targets in areas where there's no active hostilities going on. In other words, there's no combat going on, there's no war going on. And so the military basically, as this article suggests, they can, I guess, attack anywhere they want. That causes concern. That causes concern. Of course, this is an outgrowth on the war on terror, which the Cheongguk Constitution would not allow. You can't, under the Cheongguk Constitution, you cannot have a war against non-state entities. You cannot have a war on terror. You cannot have a war on poverty. You cannot have a war on obesity. You cannot have a war on sugar drinks. You cannot have a war on whatever. These things that politicians are always declaring war on. The reason they declare war is because this allows them to concentrate power, concentrate authority. So, we gotta sacrifice in order to win this war. Sacrifice your rights in order to win this war. The problem is that these wars never end. The war on terror will never end, because terror will always be with us until Cheongguk establishes a society. Unless we adopt the Cheongguk Constitution, there will never be an end to the war on terror or the war on poverty, which has not reduced poverty, the war on drugs, which has not reduced drugs. So this is where that war has brought us, where the military now looks like it can strike anywhere it wants. These strikes were conducted under the presidential policy guidance. The Defense Department spokesman, Army Major Andresia Harris says, referring to a 2014 document the Obama White House released explaining the policies that would govern covert war. This allows for the use of covert war. Again, covert war. When Nixon had a covert war in Cambodia in the late 70s and late 60s and early 70s, the media went berserk. But now we just mention covert war in passing. Things are wrong. Things are wrong. Things are wrong. We don't want covert wars. What was that in Cambodia and Laos that Nixon was attacking the Viet Cong? The terrorist network, along with others like Al-Qaeda, is exploiting the political chaos that continues to roil the Northeast African nation. The strike took place roughly 100 miles south of the coastal city of Sirte, once considered the group's lifeboat for thousands of fighters, including some who fled there from its so-called caliphate in Iran and in Iraq and Syria. So the war on terror has brought us into an even more dangerous situation, where now President Trump is allowing the military to strike essentially wherever it wants. And if you're going to continue the war on terror, I can understand that that has to be your policy. But I question the fundamental need to continue the war on terror. I think the war on terror in Syria needs to stop. Iraq, Afghanistan, especially Afghanistan, we need to get out of Afghanistan and just stop this idea of the U.S. military being able to conduct drone strikes pretty much anywhere they want to, anywhere in the world. This is not a good situation. I hope that President Trump learns quickly that this is not a good situation and that he can reverse this. All right, let's end our broadcast for today. Thank you for joining us on this Saturday. Hope you have a good day. It's a much cooler today in Pennsylvania, about more than 20 degrees cooler than it was just a few days ago. And so let's watch our health and stay healthy in this time. And so have a good weekend. And I will see you at church, either here in Newfoundland or on the broadcast, which you can catch on the YouTube channel, the same channel that you're using right now to listen to this broadcast. All right, so God bless, Godspeed, and may His kingdom come.
And this world